You've heard from the three speakers, including Jordan speaking from DC. That was a video recording. And as you think about the type of questions that you want to raise to our speakers, let me just start it off. One of the things which, if you take the flow of the morning's discussion, and we've spoken about how the future of a city is not just about urban planning, it's about urban governance systems, that there's a need to take that larger systems perspective. And both of you have spoken about one key reasons why you need to look at that, and that is the uncertainty of what will come and the importance of building adaptive capabilities, resilience in our systems. I wanted to take that a bit further and to ask each of you, in the face of complexity, in the face of what Jordan calls the network effects in his video, from your experiences of what you have seen of governments in Singapore, across the world, what really helps a city or a government, whether at a national level or municipal level, to have a systems approach, to have what Peter calls a whole of government approach to dealing with issues?
Thank you. At the very simplest way, and it's more complex than this, but at the very simplest way, it really does take leadership. Because as I commented very briefly, we organize to make that very hard to do. We budget, and budget and assets are power in most organizations, so we budget to make that very difficult to do. It needs to start with, where does it make sense to share? Where does it make sense to be a system of systems? There's certainly within the social service, and this is a big conversation happening in the industry today, in the social service area, social security, social benefits, and looking at that teamed with healthcare, and how do you build a healthier society by combining those two? And then you start to bring in, very quickly, you'll start to bring in environmental organizations, because that impacts health. And so I think it's a step-by-step approach, but without the senior leaders saying we're going to do this, it's very, very difficult to make it happen.
I just want to build on this point about leadership. In fact, if you talk to governments, administrations around the world, they will acknowledge the importance of taking this whole of government networked approach. But in fact, a lot of it is more lip service, because the reality is that Singapore is a compact country. You know, we don't have any layers. There's the central government, and you know that's it. But even then, there are a lot of challenges getting the agencies to talk to each other, to work together, even to share information. That's a big challenge. Now imagine in other countries which are not like Singapore, a city-state, but which have a federal level, state level, municipal levels. That's even more challenging to talk about whole of government. And I think for me, while we can make the intellectual argument for governments operating in this way, in fact, it is really truly an act of real leadership to compel people to come together. And the moment you take your eye off the ball, they'll be back to the normal way of operating, which is they operate within their silos. So I think we can make the argument for whole of government, but I think it depends critically on people at the top paying a lot of attention to that, and also walking the talk. They have to show that they are also prepared to work in that mode. If they tell people down the line, well, whole of government, but they are still operating in a very fractured, siloed mode, then it's not going to work as well. So I think it's very challenging, but I think it is an imperative in a complex world.
Yes. Over there on the right.
Thanks a lot. It's very nice to have you to give us a presentation to discuss these issues. I think it's we face a change, as Prime Minister Lee in the National Day, the politicians point out. Maybe they have three partnerships instead of the two partnership before, like public-private now. One more, maybe the NGO, the social venture or social organization. So in this way, I just ask to the chairman about how the URA and also IBM to prepare for this change, especially in Singapore, maybe not just here, also Asia, the bottom-up, the information, social information collection, and the street partnership for the complex, the governments in the future. Thanks.
Well, I think first, this is very much a work in progress. We are, as I think Kun Hian mentioned, a lot of our work in the Urban Redevelopment Authority involves the development of master plans and concept plans. But one of the things which we do focus on is to get feedback from interested groups, professional groups, private sector, public sector, as well as the people sector. And the law requires us, every time we put up a plan, to display that and people can give their feedback. But I think that is, I think, the easiest part. What people expect today, and I'm talking about both the citizens and organizations, NGOs, people in the private sector, what they expect today is much deeper consultations and involvement in co-creation. And we spoke, I think, a bit about the Green Corridor. That's only, I would say, an easy part. Now, how are you going to plan a whole new township? How are you going to plan for new demands for an aging population? How are you going to plan for new requirements for greater mobility? How do you do this, and how do you shift from the traditional mode, which is the government works things out, displays its plans, gets a bit of feedback, and then executes, to one in which you get real consultations and co-creation from the bottom up? I think that is something which I think will evolve over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but already you can see a lot of steps being taken, at least in Singapore, towards that kind of goal. But don't forget, in the end, you know, it's not about the government saying, well, I take into account all your points of view, but at the end of the day, who's going to take the decision? It's still the government who has to take the decision. There'll be some people who will be very happy with the decisions, others will be unhappy. Is that good governance or bad governance? I think it depends on your point of view, but I think in the end, let's remember, you vote governments in, and they have to make decisions.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So there are some models today. So for good or bad, and there's some people in my home country in the US says what I'm about to say is a lack of government leadership, and there's others that would say, isn't this wonderful? And that is the huge role that the NGOs play in the social safety net in the US. Everything from food to housing to psychological care to child care, I mean, you go on. And the government promotes that through making donations to these organizations as a tax-deductible process. So there's a model there, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. The country where I live, wonderful, amazing experience in China, and the difference there is there's not a lot of NGOs, and so maybe there's an opportunity as China ages faster than it's going to get rich to maybe foster the support of the aged with NGOs. I don't know, we'll see. But that's a very interesting question. It isn't just it's not a two-way street, right? You got that NGO piece could be very, very important. That's a great question.
I think it's an important point, which, since in the earlier sessions you parked some things with us, maybe I'll park it for the next sessions. This point of co-creation, what exactly does it involve? I think a lot of cities, a lot of governments are evolving to have a better understanding of it. Peter in his talk spoke about moving from government for the people to government with the people. During my Eisenhower Fellowship stint in the States last year, I met the first US government, open government officer in the White House. She shared with me something interesting. She said that if you want co-creation to work, you have to be very specific. She spoke about how they had an initiative to take anything that has more than 20,000 signatories, and the White House will respond to that. And they used that as a way to try to get co-creation. The first thing that came up was actually from the marijuana lobby, legalized marijuana, and they spent a lot of time dealing with that. But that was not the kind of co-creation they were looking for when they first seeded that. But what was effective, she said, interestingly, was actually something much more narrow, but which was effective. And they have this patents office whereby they put out things, and part of patents work requires people to say, was this something that you've seen somewhere else? And what they did was that they put up these patent applications online, and there's interestingly a community of people out there who will look at it and tell them, yes, there are these inventions that I've seen out elsewhere, and therefore this is what they call technically prior art. So one of her points was that when you do co-creation, if you can be as specific as possible and appeal to a community with expertise, you'll probably go much further. Other questions? Perhaps we can take one or two more questions before we end.
Hi, I'm Kelly from the Public Utilities Board. So I want to thank all three speakers first for your very thought-provoking and interesting speeches. But I would like to quote from Peter's slide. He mentioned that long-term success comes not from perpetual growth, but from successful responses to challenges. So in the context of Singapore, we're operating under a whole-of-government approach when we're doing things. So usually you require a lot of consensus from various parties involved in the same issue. So how do you think this could potentially hamper the approach of responding successfully to challenges, knowing that usually such solutions requires you to adopt new solutions that are untested and out of the box? How do you think that the whole of government approach might kind of hamper it from properly?
Well, I think you should understand that these were general statements. In fact, I think a lot of the day-to-day issues which governments and authorities confront don't need this kind of co-creative approach, nor do they need to spend a lot of time agonizing. They just deal with it, they solve it. The point I was making is that in today's world, and there are various reasons why it's getting more and more complex in the way I described, that generates very difficult, wicked problems. Wicked problems include things like your demographic issues, whether it's aging population, how to improve TFR. It also includes things like climate change, how do you deal with climate change. It also includes issues like what is the economic structure of Singapore going to be like in future, because work and jobs are going to change. So all these are very wicked problems, and these are the types of things where governments really do have to come together, work in a very whole-of-government way. And whole-of-government, I must add, doesn't only mean government agencies talking to each other. I think whole-of-government actually means whole-of-nation. You are talking to other people who may have insights, experiences, and perhaps contrary views. And this gives you a better sense of what the issues are. But this takes a lot of time. It takes a change of mindset. It, I think, imposes new demands on the bureaucrat who's been used to taking decisions on his own and taking decisions very quickly. So I think we can't apply this to every problem, but let's find a way to prioritize what the big problems are, and then use this approach for the big problems, not every problem.
And with that, I think you would agree with me that we've had 3 excellent presentations from our speakers, from Peter, from Jeff, and Jordan, and we also had a very invigorating and insightful discussion with them. So please join me in thanking Peter, Jeff, and Jordan.